2012, ano em que o BNDES, Banco Nacional do Desenvolvimento, completa 60 anos. E que tal comemorar pensando os próximos 10 anos? Você assiste hoje a segunda mesa redonda do Seminário Internacional O Brasil e o Mundo em 2022, que reuniu no Rio de Janeiro especialistas de diversos países. Hoje falaremos sobre a China e o mundo árabe, com a participação do mediador Brad DeLong.
China has been, in a way, the miracle, but as I think most people know, conditions in much of the countryside have not improved, have grown worse. China has this huge cast of workers without residential documents, that is, rural immigrants, whose position in terms of their rights is similar to undocumented immigrants in this country.
The Arab Spring I compared, when it erupted, to the 1848 upheavals in Europe. Very important for changing consciousness, but I wondered, even in the early days, what else they would manage to change. And they were fighting for liberty. And many of them were also fighting for equality and fraternity. But liberty they won in some countries, Tunisia, Egypt. Equality and fraternity of uniting the Arabs, who after all are one nation in many ways, that has not happened. And so the result of the first phase of the Arab Spring is that the old systems has still not been removed. There have been slight changes within it, but it's still there.
The Arab Spring is substantially an uprising against neoliberal policies. If you take a look, say Egypt was pretty similar to Latin America 10 years ago. The international financial institutions, World Bank and the IMF, were praising the Egyptian economy, praising Mubarak for running a wonderful economy. It's very healthy. All the indicators are positive. You're familiar with that in Latin America. They were fine for, they had their usual consequences. There was economic growth, highly concentrated, huge amount of corruption, a shredding of the democratic process, declining support systems and benefits for the large majority, harsh repression of labor. So sure, it's fine, it's working wonderfully. And then it crashed and you get the Arab Spring.
This session discusses the future economic and political trajectories of China and the Arab world, two that have almost always been crucial almost all the time since the invention of agriculture. So, Fangang, China, growth and overtaking, or relative stagnation a la Japan, asset markets, financial fragility, the drive to high mass consumption, international integration.
First of all, I have to talk about short-run issues, about ongoing slowdown of Chinese economy. Well, a lot of debates on that, but I would say, first of all, there is the main element of this slowdown is cyclical. It's a slowdown from previous overheating. Chinese economy has not been always to double-digit growth. There is a double-digit growth in the early 90s, then followed by a slowdown from 1996 to 2003. Quite a long period of time, during which Asia crisis happened, and then the last episode was the SARS in the early 2003. During that period of time, China's growth was normally at 7 or even lower than 7%, and China suffered deflation for 3 period of time, each time 2 years, So then it started to grow faster since 2004, after the SARS. And then the growth rate went up to something like 14% in 2007. Then the slowdown, make an adjustment during the 2008, but then crisis come, the global financial crisis come, then the Chinese government adopted a very strong stimulus package, which stirred the economy up again in 2009 and 2010, and the growth rate in some quarter reached 12%. So that's a history. That's a history of Chinese economic growth. What we can learn from that, actually, we can learn that whenever China have a growth above 9%, China will have inflation. Whenever China have a growth rate above 10%, we got inflation and assets bubble. And whenever Chinese growth down under 7%, we got deflation. What that mean? That means 8% around is we call the potential growth or normal growth, without inflation, without deflation, without overheating, without bubble. So that what we expect this time China will achieve. Down from overheating to a normal growth. I think that's basically what the policy are targeting on. And we do believe that if this year the economy can go down from 12% down to 8%, it could be a very good news for China because it laid down the foundation for the next couple of years of so-called stable growth. And in terms of this, I would say China has been successfully prevented the bigger bubble. We did have some bubbles during the 2005, 2007, and during the 2009, 2010, particularly the assets bubble. But policy start to function and then to turn the cycle down to the normal growth. So this is a short run issue. And I understand the most important things people are now in the mind is that how long, in the long run, how long China will continue its growth. I think that's just, and we're talking about the 2020 and 2030. Before I go to long run aspect, I want to give you a few numbers for the status quo at the moment. Number one, per capita GDP of China is now is $5,400 US. Partially thanks to the appreciation of renminbi in past 5 years for something like 25%. But it's still, you can see it's still developing, low-income developing country. Still, the per capita GDP is still tens of the advanced developed countries, and less than the half of Brazil in terms of per capita GDP. And then, very importantly, industrialization only 70 or less 70% in terms of labor force. Although there is a lot of immigrant workers and industrialization of the relocation of the labor force from rural area to the urban area, but still there are 30 to 35% of the labor force who are mainly got their income from activities of farming activities. And then only a little bit more than 50% as urbanization ratio in terms of the residence where the people live and where people, I'm talking about where people, even less people who really get the benefit of the urban public service. Government debt over GDP ratio is somehow, it's a little bit less than 40%, include all central bank debt, central government debt, and the local government borrowings. include that. I'm not going to details of that, but that's a recent number we calculated, including all the local borrowings. Still manageable, because the local borrowing during the 2009 only happened for 1 year, and it has stopped now. And non-performing loans, the banking sector, for the official figures for the major banks, is something like 2% to 3%. So I'm not going to details, but it's still manageable. It's increasing in some places because of local debt, but it's still manageable. And if the housing market is stabilized in this way in the near future, it could be manageable. And the state sector, a lot of people talk about the Chinese state capitalism economy, but actually the state sector only accounts for 30% of GDP as a contribution. It accounts for more in terms of capital, but accounts for less as an employer of the labor force. Private sector haven't been increasing as a proportion of GDP contribution, but it didn't decreasing either. Most of the manufacturing industries are private owned, but the state company concentrate on the natural resources, natural monopoly, utility industries, and some kind of natural monopoly industries. Anyway, and the inflation now is something like 2% at the moment, is under control. So what's the long-term perspective for the next stage of development of China? Well, because of there's a lot of problems of China. In Chinese society, not only the economy, but the political, social, a lot of problems, a lot of complaint, a lot of things are really not comfortable whenever you meet those kind of problems. And disparity is increasing, and we expect social disparities is increasing anyway. And the structure of economy is not very healthy in the sense. The consumption is quite low. Household current consumption actually only account for 35% of GDP. Another consumption is 15% of consumption of GDP by the government, and 50% of GDP as a saving. And you break up the saving, you spend 47% of GDP on the investment, and 3% at the moment is a current account surplus, and you accumulate the US dollar or other foreign currency as a reserves. So a lot of problems, and the social and political problems. So I think the role I would like to play here is to address some positive side of the issues. Then we can counterbalance the view, and you make a judgment what this kind of positive, negative factors will play out.
No próximo bloco, continuamos com o diretor do Instituto Chinês de Pesquisas Econômicas e secretário-geral do China Reform Foundation, Fan Gang. E ainda hoje, o embaixador Afonso Celso de Ouro Preto nos dá uma verdadeira aula sobre o mundo árabe. Continuamos agora com o diretor do Instituto Chinês de Pesquisas Econômicas e secretário-geral do China Reform Foundation, Fan Gang.
The first factor is, of course, labor wages are increasing, and we have got some labor shortage in the coastline cities in recent years. So a lot of people say China's manufacturing industry is no longer to be competitive. Then China's growth will definitely slow down. Well, here, I agree the slowdown, but if slow down to 8%, I think standard is still high growth. But labor is in shortage in some coastlines, but it's not very in shortage in the interior regions. One of the reasons actually for this shortage of labor is actually the structure of the society. And we call that early withdrawal of migrant workers from labor supply to the urban sectors. Why withdrawal? Because they are not allowed to, they are not served by public services and public goods when they stay in the city. Then people blame this for the so-called 户口, the urban registration, residential registration system. But actually behind this system, there are some more fundamental problems in China. That is the land system in rural area. What is the land system in the rural area? It's not, it's owned by the collectives, and the household can run it, but you cannot sell it, because you do not have the labor, the ownership. And with this, the urban government have the reasons do not provide the services to those people, because they supposed to belong to the rural areas, belong to that small piece of land. And the last small piece of land actually provide as a social security for those people. So that separate the rural people and the urban society. That make the migrant workers only stay in the cities for a short period of time. If they stay, they have to solve the problem of the education of their children, and they have to do the social security, the pension, and other social welfare with the rural government. So they withdraw from cities and went back. So that's why now we have the labor shortage in the coastline, and there is still labor supply in the interior regions. Well, this is a long-term issue, definitely, and a lot of reforms are required. But this shows, well, the government is working on that. Only in recent years, government has started to have policies to encourage local government to provide the service to those people, and start to provide the change the 户口 system in recent years, and the land system. But it's a long-term issue. You cannot solve this in the short run. But what this means in the labor market, that means China is not, labor supply is not finished. This is not the total labor issue. This is a relocation issue. And that means we will still have supply, if not in the coastline, but in the interior region. So wage is increasing, but wage may not increase more than labor productivity, or not equal to the labor productivity. So several reasons survey shows that wage is increasing, but still increase less than the increase of labor productivity. So cheap labor is over, but is not quite over. China will rely on, the future China growth may not rely on this labor factor very much, but it's not become a negative factor. It's still quite a positive factor for a foreseeable future. So I'm not saying this is still the same as before. What happened in the past 30 years, at least for 20 years, the real wage is decreasing. The nominal wage was fixed, but inflation is increasing. So the real wage is no longer now. That trend is stopped. But the wage is increasing, but I would say as long as it's still under, labor supply is still there, and the labor productivity is still increasing, and the higher than the wage increase, this labor factor is still there, not totally disappeared. And then the investment issue. People talk China rely on the investment too much. It's true. And is that going to cause the so-called hard landing or crash of the economy and the economic crisis? Because the economic crisis is about the overcapacity. If you invest too much, you have too much overcapacity. Well, number one, China do have too much investment because China have too much savings. By the way, where the saving is come from, actually now the major contributor to this increase of savings is not the household sector. Chinese household saving rate is quite stable. The increasing contributor to this national saving is corporate sector. Corporate sector now really save as a major, is already the biggest contributor to the national savings. And when you have a 50% saving, you have to investment quite a lot. But here is what the composition of the investment become important to understand the current situation and the next stage of development. 40% of a total national investment is actually in the infrastructures, urban infrastructures, including the subway, the high-speed railway, the railway, highway, and urban facilities. Those we can say are actually the long-term, it's a public long-term consumer durables. And then 30% of investment is in the housing assets. That is a private long-term consumer durables. So only in past few years, only 30% of investment invest in the industrial capacities. And looking forward to the next stage, when you have only the urbanization ratio at 50%, you have a long way to go for those kind of investment in the public infrastructures. I'm not saying this structure is going to forever, and I do think we make a lot of suggestions that government should do everything to try to reduce the saving rate and to increase the current consumption rate. But also, we don't like China become a consumption-led country. At this stage of development, when you have so much infrastructures need to be invested in, you don't want a country become 80% of consumption country. You do want to keep some investment going. Then export. Of course, China's export is now slowed down because of US, Europe financial crisis. But at the moment, the export continue to grow at a double-digit level. And most importantly, I do believe people exaggerated the importance of the export to Chinese growth. In terms of total export over GDP ratio, export is counted for 40% of GDP. But if we count for the value added in the export, it's only counted for 14%, 15% of China's GDP. So China is a large economy by that way. Mainly its growth depends on the domestic demand, either consumption demand or the investment demand. Export is important, and I believe China still need to increase that ratio. So believe it or not, I think China still have a potential because China's competitiveness is still improving. Increase the ratio of value added in the GDP, but it's not that important. So even with the global slowdown, China still can manage for a growth. And particularly, of course, North Atlantic is now slowed down and the market is shrinking. But now the world is no longer as a, North Atlantic as a major part. Well, 50% of GDP now in terms of PPP already come from the emerging market and developing country. 70% of the growth of world GDP coming from the developing country. So as long as that market continue and China's export and China's trade with those economies now is growing, It's still growing, yes. And then China's service industry is much, much lagged behind. It have a huge potential for next stage, particularly when the urbanization, accelerate. This service industry have a big potential to grow. And then last but not the least, in past 30 years, Chinese economy didn't rely too much. Well, Chinese growth didn't get the contribution from innovation very much. Because in the early stage, you just started. It's hard to have any innovation. You may do a lot of a copy, but you do not have much innovation. And education system, financial system is really not support that. And in particular, when the companies are still far away from the frontier, it's hard to have any innovation. But think about next stage. More and more Chinese companies are coming to the frontier, and they start to their research and development. And I do believe in next stage, after 20 years, 30 years, a lot of the Chinese company actually only 20 years history. So next stage, I do believe the innovation will play a bigger role. When the labor play less role, but innovation may play a bigger role. Anyway, this is positive factors which may counterbalance some negative factors which concern Chinese economic growth.
Fan Gang afirma que enxerga potencial de crescimento para a China nos próximos 10 anos, mas admite também que lidar com a corrupção e continuar as reformas social e política são desafios permanentes. Além disso, é preciso unir esforços para evitar uma grande bolha e uma crise econômica, financeira, política e social.
A lot of the financial reforms are needed, particularly China is still far away from capital account liberalization. But the recent months, we do see some progress happening in that regard. For example, interest rate start to be reformed. Interest rate mechanisms start to be reformed. In past several years, lending rate are already flexible, upward flexible. Now the deposit rate start to upward flexible as well. And the authorities start to try to narrow the spread. And then the exchange rate regime also have been reformed in quite a dramatic way, because now the daily band for change is 1%, positive and negative. That almost equivalent in terms of the total possibility of the appreciation or depreciation. It's almost equivalent to the flexible regime, but of course you cannot change 20% per day or 30% per day. So you manage that to prevent the big shock, external shocks. Then there's a further relaxation for using the foreign currencies and then allow more flexibility of capital outflows. There's a lot of issues need to be reformed, but it seems that the things are still moving in that direction. But what I would like to remind you is that for the foreseeable future, we may not expect China to have a total freedom of capital flows or exchange rate. There might be always some management there. But compared to the other regime for the country like China, developing country in the early stage with a lot of institutional problems, maybe that's not the bad thing to manage the risk of this financial liberalization. Last but not the least, the renminbi. I think the policymakers not expect the renminbi become international currency for their lifetime, I believe. The bottom line is that we do not see in the foreseeable future renminbi will become convertible, totally free convertible at the current account. So that's the basic condition for becoming an international currency. And the recent acceleration of renminbi, so-called internationalization, but I would like to call it the regionalization in Hong Kong and Asia, was actually accelerated by two factors. Number one, because there is a financial crisis in US and Europe, and the dollar and the euro become less stable, and the people naturally looking for other alternatives. So market people, actually the Hong Kong people, went to the central bank in Beijing, asked for more liberalization to use the renminbi in the first place. And secondly, in the past few years, because of expectations of renminbi appreciation, then everybody liked to hold some renminbi for that kind of evaluation. And now appreciation mostly stopped, and that kind of process of acceleration of renminbi is stopped. So the trend of this world is diversification of the currency system. Not rely too much on one or two currencies, but to rely more and more on some other currencies. But in this stage, for every other currencies, it's only marginal issue, And for China, I do believe the things are moving in that direction. That direction is not renminbi as another major currency, but many other currencies have become a kind of international currency. Not many, but several other currencies become renminbi currency. And I even wrote an article to propose, I call the cross-holding of currencies in the Asian countries. For example, China holds some Japanese currency denominated bonds, and the Japanese hold some Chinese currency. And Thailand, China, Korea, that is happening. The recent event is that Japan asked the Chinese central bank to sell some renminbi bonds to the Japanese government, and Japanese can hold that as a part of the reserve. So if that thing happened, that definitely it's the right direction of diversification. But for the long time, foreseeable future, I think the current arrangement of the international currency will still hold. But anyway, renminbi is a long-term issue. It's longer than China's growth issue. China's growth may last for another 10, 20 years, high growth, 20 years, but renminbi will be even longer because of financial liberalization, all those issues. But I do believe that more diversified system is better than a single currency domination system. With that, I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Depois do intervalo, o assunto é mundo árabe com o embaixador Afonso Celso de Ouro Preto. Até já. Continuamos com o Seminário Internacional O Brasil e o Mundo em 2022, que reuniu no Rio de Janeiro, em julho, especialistas de diversas partes do planeta. Nesse bloco, o embaixador Afonso Celso de Ouro Preto nos fala sobre o mundo árabe.
Falar de Oriente Médio hoje constitui um trabalho particularmente difícil. Difícil porque praticamente todo mundo sabe muito a respeito do Oriente Médio. A outra dificuldade é que o Oriente Médio se encontra ainda numa situação semelhante a um caleidoscópio. Uma realidade fluida, sem que possamos ver com clareza, com precisão, para que direção ele se dirige. Todos sabem, obviamente, que está ocorrendo ainda a grande primavera árabe. Hoje não seria mais uma primavera, seria um outono, um verão ou algo assim. Movimento algo parecido às grandes revoluções europeias de 1848, que sacudiram todo o continente e que, a bem da verdade, chegaram até o Brasil com a revolta praieira. Essa grande sacudida, volto a usar a expressão da primavera árabe, alcançou uma vasta comunidade que se estende do Marrocos ao Golfo Pérsico, da fronteira turca ao Sudão. Uma grande comunidade que tem certos elementos de união. Primeiro, a religião. Trata-se de uma comunidade unida pela religião muçulmana, sobretudo pela sua vertente sunita. Essa comunidade é unida pela consciência de um passado glorioso. Do passado dos grandes emirados de Damasco, de Córdoba, do Cairo, do momento em que o mundo islâmico, até o século XI, talvez um pouco mais, foi sensivelmente superior ao mundo europeu em matéria de cultura e de civilização. Esse universo árabe está marcado também pela humilhação, pela vergonha da colonização. Foram países todos colonizados. Alguns desde o século XIX, como os do norte da África, pela França, outros no Oriente Médio, propriamente dito, sobretudo pela Grã-Bretanha, pela Grã-Bretanha e pela França também, quando o Império Otomano foi desmembrado após a sua derrota na Primeira Guerra Mundial. Finalmente, um outro fator de união nesse mundo árabe foram as derrotas sucessivas frente a Israel, que representam uma reação de vergonha, de um complexo que atinge todo o mundo árabe. O que divide esse mundo árabe? Eu diria que os países árabes, simplificando muito, evidentemente, se dividem em três. Existem estados constituídos, consolidados como estados, ou seja, que possuem uma administração, uma burocracia, forças armadas, estados antigos. O principal deles, o mais visível, é o maior estado árabe, é o Egito. Existem também sociedades tribais no mundo árabe, sociedades unidas apenas por fidelidades pessoais, fidelidades locais, sem que haja uma tradição de união, de estrutura administrativa comum, uma tradição de Estado. Seria o caso de uma parte da Arábia Saudita, uma parte talvez da Líbia, áreas do Iraque e, por fim, temos sociedades confessionais divididas em várias confissões. O melhor exemplo, evidentemente, é o Líbano. O Líbano está dividido entre uma população de origem maronita, outra sunita, outra xiita, outra drusa, sem que se cristã, por exemplo, dividida em cristãos maronitas e cristãos ortodoxos, sem que se saiba com precisão quais são as proporções, porque como o poder é dividido entre as diversas, digamos, religiões, igrejas, não se fazem censos há muito tempo, porque um censo alteraria o equilíbrio político do país. Essas três maneiras de ver o mundo árabe, que constituem, obviamente, uma muito grande simplificação de minha parte, têm de ser levadas em conta ao examinar qualquer realidade política desses países. O que caracteriza ainda essas comunidades, esses países? Primeiro é a artificialidade das fronteiras. As fronteiras, sobretudo no Oriente Médio, foram definidas pelos poderes coloniais de maneira totalmente arbitrária, sobretudo pela França e a Grã-Bretanha, que durante a Primeira Guerra Mundial, os famosos acordos Sykes-Picot, recortaram o Império Turco, antes mesmo do fim da guerra, atribuindo a um país, por exemplo, a Síria, foi dada à França, o Iraque, a Palestina, a Grã-Bretanha, mas foi uma divisão que nunca tinha existido na história antes. Foi feita naquele momento. Outro elemento que caracteriza também as sociedades árabes é que são, pelo menos até a famosa Primavera Árabe, constituíam sociedades autoritárias. Às vezes, as famosas primaveras árabes são apresentadas como uma luta de massas pela liberdade contra a tirania. O nacionalismo árabe se desenvolveu inicialmente com base em partidos laicos. Partidos cujo objetivo era reproduzir nas suas respectivas sociedades as instituições, a cultura europeia. Reproduziam os ideais da revolução kemalista fora do mundo árabe, na Turquia, que era de ocidentalizar nos seus costumes, na sua vida política, essas sociedades consideradas atrasadas, enfim, que tinham que superar esse atraso. A partir de um certo momento, se consolidaram movimentos religiosos. O nacionalismo nos países árabes assumiu uma conotação cada vez mais religiosa. A procura de uma identidade passou pela procura pela religião. E a ideia de criação de estados totalmente laicos, estados que seriam semelhantes aos países europeus, foi progressivamente abandonado esse ideal. Na grande explosão da nossa primavera árabe, obviamente muitas forças agiram juntas. Mas percebemos, após a Revolução, após a grande primavera árabe, nos países em que o processo, na sua fase de explosão, foi encerrado, estou pensando no Egito, na Tunísia, quem finalmente ganhou as eleições foram os religiosos. Esse movimento chega a preocupar certas parcelas da população, em particular, por exemplo, os cristãos, que começam a expressar um receio de serem perseguidos caso haja governos dedicados a uma causa islâmica. Por exemplo, no Egito, que tem 10% de cristãos, há um receio nessa comunidade cristã, que inclusive é expressa aqui no Brasil, pelos brasileiros de origem síria que são cristãos. De que vai acontecer na Síria caso os irmãos muçulmanos ganhem. No Egito também há preocupação em certos meios cristãos. O regime atual, combatido, Assad, regime tirânico, cruel, que nós todos sabemos, tinha, em geral, o apoio dos cristãos, que esses se veem ameaçados caso ele perca o poder. Então, temos um quadro muito complexo. Um quadro onde onde se delineia o fato de que a religião, o Islã, desempenhará um papel cada vez mais importante na vida política desses países. Uma outra força política também se consolida, sempre foi poderosa, mas se mantém, digamos, são as forças armadas. O exército, como estamos vendo hoje no Egito, continua a representar um estamento que divide o poder, que dividirá o poder, com o governo que está sendo formado ali. Então, o que podemos dizer? Quem ganhou a Revolução, a Primavera Árabe? Bom, obviamente, ainda é muito cedo para tirar uma conclusão precisa, porque o processo não terminou. Mas podemos dizer com um certo grau de confiança de quem está ganhando a Primavera Árabe é o Islã, que é um efeito para nós bastante inesperado, na medida em que víamos nesse processo uma luta pela liberdade, pela emancipação das mulheres, pelos direitos humanos, etc., caminhamos para sociedades onde o Islã desempenhará um papel cada vez maior. Tudo leva a crer que essa situação vai ocorrer e já está ocorrendo no Egito e na Tunísia. É verdade também que falar em islamização é um termo sem qualquer precisão, porque o Islã, na sua grande riqueza, se eu posso dizer, tem várias vertentes. O Islã não é uma frente unida, um bloco uniforme, unido pelo fanatismo, pelo anti-ocidentalismo. O Islã se divide, como, aliás, ocorreu com todas as grandes culturas, com todas as grandes religiões. Vamos ver no futuro próximo que Islã vai predominar. Mas tudo indica que esse é o caminho. Se eu tento pensar que estados se beneficiaram da grande Primavera Árabe, eu sou obrigado a dizer que poucos. No Egito, na Tunísia, certamente os Estados Unidos e a Europa perderam posições. O presidente Mubarak era o aliado mais fiel dos Estados Unidos. Na Síria, se a revolta levar à derrocada do presidente Assad, perderá, evidentemente, a Rússia. Será que o Irã ganhará? Não está claro. A Europa desempenha um papel muito modesto em todo esse movimento, apesar da sua presença durante o conflito da Líbia. A China observa com grande atenção, com grande cuidado, mas não se envolveu até agora. Os Estados Unidos mostraram também uma grande prudência. Com uma guerra ainda no Afeganistão, não definida, conflitos no Iraque, é difícil imaginar que os Estados Unidos abram uma nova frente na Síria ou em qualquer outro país do Oriente Médio. Então, estamos todos perplexos diante dessa crise. Podemos dizer apenas, muito rapidamente e sem qualquer exercício de ufanismo, que nós, no Brasil, temos uma situação favorável, na medida em que existe no nosso país uma imensa comunidade de origem sírio-libanesa, inclusive palestina hoje, em que somos herdeiros também, por Portugal, de uma grande tradição do el-andaluz ibérico. Talvez tenhamos elementos para dialogar com esses novos estados. O que não significa que estou tentando aqui apresentar ou sugerir uma política, apenas dizer que temos alguns elementos para dialogar. Muito obrigado.
No próximo episódio da série O Brasil e o Mundo em 2022, evento que reuniu no Rio de Janeiro especialistas de diversas partes do planeta para pensar o Brasil e o mundo nos próximos 10 anos, o tema será Subcontinente Indiano, África e Leste Europeu, com os painelistas Sunil Kilnani, Afonso Celso de Ouro Preto e Vladimir Popov. Até lá!